My name is Victoria Aaron, and I am 21 years old. On the night of my 21st birthday, my mother slid a thick envelope across the white tablecloth of a Las Vegas steakhouse, took a sip of her champagne, and smiled. She said, "Victoria, honey, we are rearranging your accounts tomorrow. I have had the lawyers draw up the management paperwork. You just need to sign these final authorizations. It is too much money for a 21-year-old to handle." She was talking about the $2.8 million trust fund my late father left me. She said it loud enough for the waiter to hear, loud enough for my older sister Tiffany to nod in agreement. My mother thought she was cashing in her winning ticket. She had spent the last 10 years treating my 21st birthday like a guaranteed jackpot waiting to be claimed. She did not know that exactly 24 hours earlier I had quietly moved every single cent into a locked corporate account she could not touch. My stomach dropped to the floor that night, not out of shock but out of the sheer terrifying realization that my security sweep had been correct. My mother was actually trying to steal my future. Welcome to Grape Vengeance. This is a place where we share real stories about the moments families cross the line and the unshakable boundaries that keep us safe. If you have ever had to build a firewall against your own family to protect your peace, drop a comment. Tell me how old you are and where you are listening from today. Be sure to subscribe. I grew up in Henderson, Nevada. It is the kind of suburb where the neon glow of the Las Vegas Strip reflects off the windshields of minivans and grocery store parking lots. In this state, the culture is built on the next big payout. The idea that if you sit at the table long enough, you are owed a win. My mother Brenda lived her entire life by that philosophy. She gambled with relationships, with credit cards, with other people's patience. She always believed the universe owed her a windfall she did not earn. My father died when I was 11. He was a practical man. He knew exactly who he had married, which is why he locked the trust tight. The stipulations were clear. Not a single cent could be dispersed until the clock struck midnight on my 21st birthday. He thought the time lock would protect me. He did not realize that giving a gambler a countdown clock just gives them time to plan the heist. I chose a different path. I am an information security analyst. I do not believe in luck. I believe in firewalls, encrypted data, and network monitoring. I look for system vulnerabilities before they can be exploited. In my world, data never lies. Only people do. While my mother spent my teenage years counting down the days until my trust fund vested, planning renovations and vacations she could not afford, I spent my time learning how to read digital footprints. I deal exclusively in fax access logs and unalterable code. For years, my mother viewed my incoming birthday as her personal payday. I viewed it as a critical system vulnerability that required a zero-trust security patch. To understand how we ended up staring at each other over half-eaten steaks while she tried to commit felony fraud against me, you have to understand the environment I was raised in. My older sister Tiffany was the golden child. She is 26 years old and calls herself a lifestyle creator. That is a polite way of saying she posts photos of iced lattes and luxury rental cars while drowning in $85,000 of undisclosed credit card debt. I know the exact number because I am the one who had to scrub a Trojan virus off her laptop last year after she clicked a suspicious link promising free social media followers. Her husband Brad is the perfect match for her. He is a serial entrepreneur. In the span of 4 years, he has pitched a custom sneaker delivery service, an artisanal dog food subscription, and a cryptocurrency exchange that consisted entirely of a poorly coded landing page. None of them generated a single dollar of revenue. Yet at family dinners, my mother Brenda would raise her wine glass and toast to Brad the visionary and Tiffany the rising star. I sat at the end of the table drinking tap water and eating dry chicken. I never got a toast. I got work orders. In my family, I was not treated like a daughter or a sister. I was treated like an unpaid utility. My mother operated under the delusion that her life was a slot machine, and Tiffany was the winning combination. Brenda funneled every spare dollar she had into Tiffany's aesthetic, propping up the illusion of wealth, while their actual bank accounts bled dry. When the consequences of their poor choices caught up with them, they turned to me to fix the technical fallout. When Brad clicked a malicious attachment on a phishing email that locked down his entire hard drive right before a meeting with phantom investors, he did not call a professional. He brought the laptop to my bedroom at 10 at night and dropped it on my desk. He said, "Fix it, Vicky." Not please, not thank you, just a command. I spent 9 hours bypassing the ransomware, writing a custom script to isolate the encrypted files and restoring his operating system from a shadow backup. He picked it up the next morning and complained that his desktop background had been changed to the default settings. When Tiffany fell for a direct message scam that hijacked her online accounts, she called me in hysterics. Her identity was tied to a grid of carefully curated photos, and the hackers were demanding a ransom in Bitcoin. She cried so loud my mother came into my room and scolded me for not working faster. She told me I was being unsupportive of my sister's career. I spent 2 days tracking the breach, routing my connection through secure proxy servers, and navigating the support channels to prove her identity and reclaim the handle. When the account was restored, Tiffany posted a selfie celebrating her triumphant return. She credited good vibes and positive energy. She did not mention the sister who had stayed up for 48 hours straight writing code to pull her digital life out of a dumpster. Then there was the home security system. Brenda wanted perimeter cameras, smart locks, and motion sensors installed around her house in Henderson. She wanted to watch the driveway, the porch, and the backyard from her phone. A professional installation company quoted her $2,000. She handed me a box of hardware she bought on discount and told me to get it done by Sunday. I ran the wiring in the Nevada heat, calibrated the motion zones, and secured the network protocols so nobody could intercept the feed. I built her a fortress. She never once said she appreciated the effort. She just complained that the app drained her phone battery. I kept track. It is an occupational hazard. You cannot be an information security analyst without logging the data. I logged every hour I spent repairing their careless mistakes. 142 hours over 2 years. That was the labor I gave them. Now let me tell you what they gave me. My high school graduation was on a Friday afternoon in June. I had finished near the top of my class. I earned a full-ride scholarship to the state university by maintaining a perfect grade point average while working part-time at an electronics repair shop. The ceremony was held at the district arena. I walked across the stage, grabbed my diploma, and looked into the audience to find my family. The bleachers were packed with cheering parents holding flowers and balloons. I scanned the middle section where I had told Brenda to sit. The seats were empty. I found out later that my mother had attended the ceremony for exactly 14 minutes. I tracked the timestamp on her parking validation when she left the ticket on the kitchen counter. 14 minutes. She walked into the arena, sat down, took one blurry photo from the back row, and left before the principal finished his opening remarks. She left because Tiffany was having a crisis. Tiffany had been invited on a brand trip to Tulum, a trip that required her to pay her own airfare and lodging, and she could not decide which swimsuits to pack. She called Brenda crying about how stressed she was. My mother abandoned my high school graduation to go to a shopping mall and hold up bikinis in a dressing room mirror for a 26-year-old woman who still needed her hand held. When I got home that evening carrying my diploma in a cheap leather folder, there was no cake. There was no card. Brenda and Tiffany were sitting on the living room floor surrounded by shopping bags. Brenda looked up from a pile of receipts and said, "Oh, you made it back. Put those bags in the recycling bin on your way to the kitchen." I set my diploma on the counter. I gathered their trash. I took it outside to the bins. I did not argue. I did not throw the shopping bags across the driveway. I did not demand an apology. That is the thing about growing up as the unacknowledged spine of a household. You learn very early that arguing with entitled people is like trying to patch a system that is fundamentally corrupt from the root directory. You cannot fix it with logic. You can only contain the damage. So I made myself small. I shrank my presence so Tiffany could continue casting her shadow. I watched my mother pour her energy, her affection, and her limited funds into a sister who produced nothing but debt and drama. I became a silent observer in my own home. I treated my family the way I treat a hostile network environment. I stopped expecting safety and started expecting breaches. I monitored the dynamics. I documented the discrepancies. I secured my own perimeter. I opened a separate bank account the day I turned 18. I routed my paychecks away from anything with my mother's name on it. I paid for my own phone plan, my own car insurance, my own food. I built my life quietly operating in the background while they performed for the spotlight. They thought my silence was submission. They mistook my lack of argument for a lack of awareness. Brenda assumed that because I never demanded a seat at her table, I was content sleeping on the floor. She thought she had broken me down into a compliant utility, a free resource she could tap into whenever she or Tiffany needed a rescue. But I was not broken. I was surviving. I was running out the clock. I knew the exact date and time my father's trust fund would vest. I knew the legal framework of the account. I knew that the moment I turned 21, I would have the capital to walk out the front door and never look back. The trust was my exit strategy. It was the key to my independence. All I had to do was maintain my cover. All I had to do was endure the casual dismissals, the unpaid tech support, and the endless toasts to Brad and Tiffany. I just had to keep my head down and wait for the calendar to turn. It was a flawless strategy. At least it was until 6 months before my 21st birthday. That was when the illusion of family annoyance shifted into something much more dangerous. That was when I realized Brenda was not just ignoring me, she was actively eyeing the vault. It started on a Tuesday evening with a letter from an auto finance company and a quiet demand that would force me to stop observing and start defending. 6 months before my 21st birthday, the slow, steady rhythm of my survival strategy hit a critical error. It was a Tuesday evening in late November. The desert air had finally cooled down, but the atmosphere inside the Henderson house was suffocating. I came home from my firm a little after 6 o'clock carrying a container of takeout sushi. I planned to eat in my room and spend the evening reviewing log files for a corporate client. Instead, I found my mother sitting at the granite kitchen island. She was not drinking wine or scrolling through social media. She was staring at a piece of heavy stock paper with a red final notice banner printed across the top. Beside her sat Tiffany weeping into a paper napkin. Tiffany was mourning the imminent loss of her pristine white Range Rover. The car was an essential prop for her influencer aesthetic. It was leased under terms that required a reliable income. Brad had assured the dealership his latest venture would cover the payments. Brad was wrong. The arrears had piled up for 4 consecutive months. The finance company was no longer sending polite reminders. They were sending a tow truck. I tried to walk past the island toward the hallway. My mother stopped me. She did not yell or command. She used a tone I had rarely heard directed at me, a soft collaborative purr. "Victoria, honey, come sit down for a minute." I set my food on the counter and took a stool across from them. The kitchen smelled like expensive vanilla candles and desperation. Brenda slid the final notice letter toward me. The balance required to halt the repossession was $14,200. It was due by Friday at 5 in the afternoon. I looked at the paper, then at my mother. I waited for her to explain why she was showing me Tiffany's auto loan default. I assumed she wanted me to hack into the lender's database and erase the debt or trace a wire transfer that Brad claimed got lost in transit. Brenda folded her hands over the marble surface. "Tiffany is in a tight spot right now," she said. "Brad has money tied up in escrow for his new app, but it will not clear until next quarter. If Tiffany loses the car, she cannot get to her brand meetings. Her deals will dry up. We cannot let that happen." "We?" That pronoun hung in the air. "In my family, we only existed when a bill was due. I need you to take out a personal loan." Brenda continued, her voice smooth and practiced. "Just $14,000. Your credit score is perfect. I saw the mail from those credit card offers you get. You have the clean history to secure a rapid approval by tomorrow morning." I stared at her, trying to process the audacity of the request. I was 20 years old. I had built a spotless credit history by working my way through high school and college, managing my meager income with clinical precision. I had never carried a balance. Now my mother was asking me to leverage my hard-earned financial stability to bail out a sister who spent her days unboxing complimentary skincare products on the internet. "Mom, I do not have the income to qualify for an unsecured loan of that size," I replied, keeping my voice level. "You do not need to worry about the monthly payments," Brenda said, leaning forward. "I will cover the minimums until your birthday. Once you turn 21 and your trust fund vests, we will just pay off the entire principal. It is only 6 months of interest. It is a bridge loan, Victoria." There it was. the quiet assumption that my father's legacy was a shared communal pot. She was openly planning to divert my inheritance to cover Tiffany's overdue car lease. In Henderson, you see people at the local slot machines convinced that the next pull will erase all their debts. Brenda looked at my trust fund with that exact same glazed, hungry expression. She saw the $2.8 million not as my secure future, but as a casino jackpot she had already mentally spent. I looked at Tiffany. She had stopped crying and was watching me with expectant, entitled eyes. She truly believed her transportation was my financial obligation. I pushed the final notice back across the island. I cannot do that, Mom. Brenda let out a short breath. I am not asking you to pay it, Victoria. I am telling you we will pay it back the second your trust clears. It is just paperwork. It is a high-interest predatory loan, I said, and my credit score is not a casino chip to be thrown at Tiffany's lifestyle. The kitchen went silent. It was not a sudden quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating stillness that settled over the room like dust after a demolition. The air felt thick. Tiffany stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Brenda did not blink. Her eyes locked onto mine and the maternal performance vanished. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw a tantrum the way she usually did when inconvenienced. Instead, she delivered a cold, calculated response that chilled me far more than any screaming match ever could. I sheltered you in this house for 2 decades, Victoria. I put a roof over your head and food on your plate. In this family, we show loyalty when someone is drowning. If you choose to turn your back on your sister over a simple signature, then you need to think very carefully about where your loyalties lie. She stood up, picked up the final notice, and walked out of the kitchen. Tiffany followed her without a backward glance. I sat alone at the island for a long time. I knew that walking away from that demand was the right decision. Giving them access to my credit would have been the first fatal breach in my firewall. But I also knew I had just shifted the dynamic of the household from passive disregard to active hostility. Over the next few weeks, the environment inside the house transformed. I became a trapped observer in enemy territory. The casual dismissals were replaced by a tense, paranoid atmosphere. Whenever I entered the living room, hushed conversations would abruptly halt. Brenda and Tiffany would exchange sharp, knowing glances. One evening, I came downstairs to get a glass of water. The dining room was dark, but the glow of a tablet illuminated their faces. They were whispering furiously. When my foot hit the bottom stair, the tablet was slapped face down onto the table. They stopped asking me to fix their tech issues. They stopped complaining about their finances in my presence. The house was functioning on a strict need-to-know basis, and I was no longer cleared for access. At first, I thought my refusal had successfully shut down the demand. I thought Brenda had given up and found another way to scrape together the funds for the car. I assumed the silent treatment was just a petty punishment for my lack of compliance. But as an analyst, you learn that when a persistent threat suddenly goes quiet, it does not mean the threat has neutralized. It means the threat has circumvented your perimeter and is looking for a back door. Brenda had not accepted my refusal. She had simply realized that asking me directly was a flawed protocol. She needed a method that did not require my consent. She was treating my trust fund like a vault, and since I refused to hand over the combination, she was plotting to drill through the floor. The tension shifted from a dull ache to a ticking timer. Every time my mother smiled at me over morning coffee, a rare and chilling occurrence, I felt the hair on my arms stand up. The silence in the house was not the sound of peace. It was the sound of a conspiracy being drafted in the shadows. I knew I had to stop reacting and start investigating. The threat was no longer theoretical. It was active, moving through the very network I lived on, and I needed to uncover exactly how she planned to break in. The server room at Zenith Cyber Defense runs at a constant 68 degrees. I sit in a secure operations center illuminated by the stark light of 3 vertical monitors, watching a coordinated intrusion attempt on a regional hospitality provider unfold in real time. Someone in a distant time zone is trying to exploit a vulnerability in a vendor payment gateway. I trace the traffic, isolate the malicious packets, and sever the connection before a single byte of customer data can be exfiltrated. My pulse stays flat. In this room, I am the architect of digital fortresses. I speak the language of packet sniffers, endpoint detection, and zero-day vulnerabilities. I command a six-figure salary to protect corporate assets from sophisticated crime syndicates. Yet when I walk through the front door of my mother's house in Henderson, I am instantly reduced to a naive child expected to run errands and absorb casual insults. People often assume network security looks like furious typing in a dark room. Real security work is mostly listening. It is sitting perfectly still and watching the telemetry for behavioral anomalies. A secure system has a heartbeat. It maintains a predictable rhythm of authorized requests and validated handshakes. When that rhythm stumbles, you know a threat is testing the perimeter. Data leaves a trail. Code does not have an ego. It does not gaslight or manipulate. It leaves an exact time-stamped record of intent. People are messy, but their digital footprints are flawless. I carried that philosophy home with me on a Thursday evening. The atmosphere inside the property had grown toxic since my refusal to fund Tiffany's vehicle arrears. The abrupt silences when I walked into the kitchen, the sudden locking of mobile screens, the forced smiles that did not reach their eyes. These were behavioral anomalies. In a corporate environment, a sudden shift in employee behavior is a leading indicator of an insider threat. You do not ask the employee if they are stealing trade secrets. You audit their network access. I sat on my bed cross-legged with my personal laptop resting on my knees. I initiated a routine diagnostic sweep of the residential local area network. I had installed that specific router 2 years ago, configuring the routing tables to prioritize my work terminal. It took me less than 3 minutes to bypass the administrative gateway and pull the recent traffic logs. I was looking for unauthorized external devices, or perhaps evidence that Brad had downloaded another strain of malware while searching for phantom investors. What I found made the ambient temperature in my bedroom feel 10 degrees colder. The router protocol had been altered. Someone had bypassed the standard security configurations to install a packet forwarding script. It was a clumsy job, the digital equivalent of picking a lock with a crowbar, but it was functional. I filtered the traffic by destination internet protocol addresses. A specific string of requests caught my attention. They were directed at the secure client portal of Vanguard Heritage, the financial institution managing my late father's estate. The trust fund. The vault. My heart executed a single hard thump against my ribs. I ran a trace route on the origin of those requests. The source was not external. The attempts to penetrate the bank portal were originating from a local media access control address. I checked the device registry. It was a tablet, specifically the rose gold tablet Brenda used to browse real estate listings and play digital solitaire. My mother was not just stewing over my refusal to pay for the Range Rover. She was actively attempting to breach the financial institution holding my inheritance. The logs showed multiple failed login attempts using variations of my father's old passwords and my social security number. She was probing the perimeter, trying to guess the combination to a $2.8 million safe. She was treating Vanguard Heritage like a slot machine, pulling the lever over and over, hoping for 3 cherries to align. A normal 21-year-old might have stormed down the hallway, thrown the laptop onto the dining table, and demanded an explanation. A normal daughter might have cried, feeling the sting of a parent treating her future like a slush fund. I did not cry. I did not storm down the hall. I sat in the glow of my monitor and felt a profound, chilling calm wash over me. The emotional ambiguity of our mother-daughter relationship evaporated. Brenda was no longer my parent. She was a hostile threat actor operating inside my network. You do not alert a threat actor that their intrusion has been detected. Doing so prompts them to change tactics and bury their tracks. Instead, you observe. I began building a silent defense. I encrypted the local hard drive on my machine using a military-grade cipher. I established a secure tunnel for all my outbound traffic, rendering my personal data invisible to anyone monitoring the residential network. Then I went on the offensive. I did not block her device from the network. I set up silent tripwires. I configured a script to run in the background, logging every keystroke, every search query, and every website Brenda visited on that shared wireless connection. I wanted to see exactly how far she was willing to go. I wanted the forensic evidence mapped out in clean, indisputable lines of code. I spent the rest of the night reinforcing the perimeter. I was no longer a trapped observer waiting for the next uncomfortable family dinner. I was an analyst gathering actionable intelligence. The countdown to my 21st birthday was no longer just a waiting game. It was a race to secure the boundaries before the malicious actor could execute a successful breach. I watched the live feed of my mother's tablet querying legal terms late into the night. She was searching for definitions related to financial conservatorships and power of attorney. The search queries were clumsy, filled with typos and desperate phrasing. How to take control of an adult child's bank account? Can a parent manage a trust fund if the child is unstable? The sheer audacity of her search history confirmed what I had suspected. She was not just trying to guess a password. She was looking for a legal loophole to bypass the security measures my father had put in place. I leaned back against my headboard and let the soft hum of the laptop fan fill the quiet room. I did not need to confront her. I just needed to let her keep typing. Every search, every click, every failed login attempt was another piece of evidence automatically archived in a hidden directory on my encrypted drive. I was building a dossier that no amount of tears or maternal guilt trips could erase. The trap was set, and I only had to wait for her to make her next move. As the digital clock on my taskbar clicked over to the early hours of the morning, a new alert flashed across my screen. An email had just been sent from the rose gold tablet, and the recipient was Tiffany. I clicked the intercepted file and prepared to read the exact blueprint of my own ruin. The digital tripwire I coded into the network router triggered exactly 42 minutes past 1 in the morning. My bedroom was dark, save for the ambient blue light casting sharp shadows against the wall. A silent notification pulsed in the bottom corner of my secondary monitor, indicating a captured packet of outbound simple mail transfer protocol traffic. My mother had just sent an email from her rose gold tablet. Brenda used a standard unsecured mail client. She treated digital communication with the same careless entitlement she applied to the rest of her life, assuming the world was simply too intimidated to look over her shoulder. I ran the captured packets through a basic protocol analyzer. The raw text decoded onto my screen in clean black letters. The subject line read, "Forward legal documents for Victoria." I leaned forward. The glow of the monitor illuminated my face in the quiet room. Tiffany. I spoke with Caldwell this afternoon, Brenda wrote, referencing a local attorney known for aggressive estate litigation. He finished the draft for the durable power of attorney. We are going to frame it as a necessary step for her mental well-being. You know how she isolates herself in that room playing on her computers instead of socializing. Caldwell says, given her young age and her antisocial behavior, we can build a compelling case that she is emotionally unequipped to manage a trust of that size. The moment she turns 21, I will file the paperwork to assume managerial control of the accounts. Do not stress over the vehicle. We will bypass the repossession and have access to the capital by next Friday. The thread contained Tiffany's reply, time-stamped 4 minutes later. Thank God, Brad is panicking about the seed capital for his new software venture. He needs $150,000 by the end of the month to pay his lead developer, or the whole project goes under. Just make sure Caldwell files the injunction before she tries to route the money to her own bank. I read the exchange 3 times. The words sat on the screen, sharp and undeniable. My own mother was conspiring to legally declare me mentally unfit. She was orchestrating a narrative of emotional instability, weaponizing the very isolation I used to survive her toxic household. I spent my days securing corporate networks against international cyber threats. My mother viewed my career as a child playing on her computers. She intended to use my introversion as evidence in a court of law to lock me in a financial cage and hand the key to my sister. When a person experiences a profound betrayal, the human body usually initiates a stress response. The sympathetic nervous system floods the bloodstream with adrenaline. The heart rate accelerates, the hands shake, the chest tightens. I experienced none of those symptoms. I sat perfectly still in my ergonomic chair. I felt the pulse at my wrist. My heart rate was dropping. The rhythm slowed into a steady, deliberate cadence. The ambient noise of the central air conditioning hummed in the background. My hands resting on the mechanical keyboard remained entirely motionless. The illusion of family died in that quiet room. It did not die with a tearful confrontation or a dramatic argument. It died in plain text. For 21 years, I had harbored a small, resilient hope that my mother's neglect was a byproduct of ignorance. I had told myself she simply favored Tiffany because Tiffany was easier to understand. I had rationalized the unpaid labor and the dismissive comments as character flaws rather than calculated intent. The emails eradicated that hope. My mother and my sister were predators. They viewed my father's legacy as a resource to be harvested, and they viewed my autonomy as an obstacle to be dismantled. Brenda did not want to protect me. She wanted to consume my future to fund her preferred daughter's lifestyle. Tiffany was already earmarking $150,000 to bankroll another one of Brad's doomed projects. They were spending my father's life savings in their heads. The grief evaporated, leaving behind a pristine clinical clarity. The emotional ambiguity was gone. I was no longer a neglected daughter seeking validation from a mother incapable of providing it. I was an information security analyst staring at a confirmed network intrusion. My family was a hostile vector. Their plot was a solvable security breach. You do not mourn a virus. You isolate it. You study its execution path and you neutralize it. I initiated a formal incident response protocol right there at my desk. I extracted the raw email files and hashed the data, securing the metadata to preserve the chain of custody. Every digital artifact carries a unique fingerprint. By hashing the files, I ensured that if Brenda ever attempted to claim the emails were fabricated, I possessed the cryptographic proof of their authenticity. I created a sealed encrypted partition on a portable solid-state drive, labeling the volume with a randomized alphanumeric string. The emails were safe, but they referenced attachments. Caldwell had sent legal drafts to Brenda's tablet. I needed to see the architecture of the trap they were building. I pivoted my trace back to the router logs, querying the incoming traffic from earlier that afternoon. I sifted through the noise of streaming services and social media updates until I found the payload. A compressed folder had been downloaded to the tablet containing the files Caldwell had provided. I captured the cached data from the router memory and initiated the decryption sequence. A status bar tracked across my screen, estimating 3 minutes until the archive unzipped. I walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The house was silent. Brenda was asleep down the hall, dreaming of the wealth she planned to extract from me. I stood at the kitchen island where just days ago she had demanded I ruin my credit for Tiffany's car. I drank the cold water, feeling it slide down my throat. My mind was already mapping out defensive countermeasures. I needed a legal mechanism to counter Caldwell's injunction, but first, I needed to know exactly what leverage Brenda thought she held. I returned to my bedroom just as the progress bar reached 100%. The folder opened, displaying 3 portable document format files. The first was a standard medical evaluation request form. The second was a petition for temporary conservatorship. The third file was labeled Durable Power of Attorney Final Draft. I opened the third document and began to read the dense legal text outlining the transfer of my financial rights. I scrolled page by page, noting the broad, terrifying permissions Caldwell had granted my mother. She would have the power to freeze my assets, alter my investments, and seize my bank accounts. I reached the final page of the document, and my hand froze on the mouse. There at the bottom of the screen, above a dateline set for my upcoming birthday, was a signature. It was my signature, signed in dark blue ink. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the exact curvature of the letters. I had not signed this document. I had never seen this document before in my life. Yet the ink on the screen was a perfect match to my own handwriting. My mother had escalated her plan from a quiet legal maneuver into a blatant federal crime. The payload from the router logs was just a preview. To understand the full scope of the breach, I needed unrestricted access to their staging environment. Brenda and Tiffany operated a shared cloud storage drive. They used it to coordinate Tiffany's influencer branding packages and to archive family photographs. I knew the credentials. I did not have to guess them or run a brute force attack. 8 months prior, Tiffany had locked herself out of the account during a brand trip and called me in a panic. I had reset the password to a string of characters she could remember, and she had never bothered to enable two-factor authentication. People who treat cybersecurity as an inconvenience are always the easiest targets to compromise. I opened a secure browser, masked my location protocol, and logged into the drive. The directory structure was a disorganized mess of image files and digital receipts, but one folder sat at the top of the hierarchy. It was labeled Victoria Estate Planning. The audacity of the title felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I clicked the icon. The folder contained several drafts of legal documents authored by the attorney Caldwell. I opened the file titled Petition for Temporary Conservatorship. The language inside was clinical and devastating. Caldwell had drafted a narrative framing me as a recluse, incapable of managing basic life functions. He cited my long hours in my bedroom working as an analyst as evidence of severe social withdrawal. He twisted my financial independence and quiet demeanor into symptoms of hoarding behavior and emotional instability. The petition requested immediate managerial control over all my current and future assets. I closed the petition and opened the next file. Durable Power of Attorney Final Version. This was the mechanism they intended to use to drain the trust before the conservatorship even hit a judge's desk. The document granted the agent sweeping, unmitigated authority, the power to open and close bank accounts, the power to liquidate investments, the power to redirect wire transfers. Brenda was naming herself as the sole agent. She was granting herself the keys to the kingdom. I scrolled through the dense legal jargon, reading the clauses that would effectively strip me of my financial identity. I reached the 14th page, the signature line. My hand stopped moving the mouse. Staring back at me from the bright white background of the screen was my own name signed in dark blue ink. Victoria Aaron. The strokes were familiar. The distinct loop of the V, the slight upward slant of the letters. It was my genuine handwriting. I leaned closer to the monitor. In digital forensics, a signature on a portable document format file is either a verified cryptographic sign-off or a scanned image. This was an image. I downloaded the file and ran it through an image analysis tool. I magnified the signature field by 400%. At that scale, the truth became undeniable. The pixels surrounding the blue ink were degraded and discolored. It was a compression artifact known as JPEG artifacting. Someone had taken a low-resolution photograph of my signature, cropped the edges, and pasted it onto the final page of the legal document. It was a crude digital graft. My father taught me to keep rigorous records of every contract, lease, and application I ever submitted. He believed paper trails were the only defense against a dishonest world. I opened my own encrypted local archive and initiated a visual pattern matching script against my stored documents. It took the software less than 2 minutes to find the source. The signature matched a college financial aid application I had signed by hand when I was 17 years old. Brenda had gone into the filing cabinet in the hallway, pulled my old high school records, photographed the application, and lifted my identity. What my mother had just done crossed the threshold from toxic family dynamics into federal crime. Identity theft, wire fraud, forgery. She was preparing to present a fabricated legal document to a financial institution to misappropriate $2.8 million. She was risking federal prison to fund Tiffany's lifestyle. It was the ultimate gambler's fallacy. Brenda believed the payout would be so large and my submission so guaranteed that she would never face the consequences of the crime. I want to pause here for a second. Put yourself in my chair. If you bypassed a network firewall, opened a hidden folder, and found cryptographic proof that your own mother was committing a felony to steal your entire future, what would you do? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Would you confront her? Would you scream? Would you throw the laptop against the wall? I did not scream. I did not confront anyone. I opened a command terminal and went to work. I extracted the metadata from the forged document. The file history revealed the exact timeline. Creation date, modification timestamps, user identifiers. I logged the precise moment Brenda's rose gold tablet accessed the file and inserted the cropped image. I captured the digital footprint of the crime and copied every piece of evidence onto an offline secure flash drive. I slid the drive into my desk drawer, locking it away. It was a physical vault, holding the weapon that could destroy them. The logical next step in any fraud investigation is law enforcement. Standard protocol dictates walking into the Henderson Police Precinct, handing the flash drive to a detective, and filing a formal report. I understood how the justice system processes domestic disputes. It is sluggish. It relies heavily on proving malicious intent. If I called the police, Brenda would weaponize her tears. She would tell the investigators she was merely trying to assist her struggling daughter. She would play the role of the concerned matriarch, twisting the narrative until the crude forgery looked like a misguided act of maternal protection. The police might hesitate to pursue charges against a weeping mother. There was a more severe consequence to involving the authorities. A pending criminal investigation would force Vanguard Heritage to freeze the trust fund. Financial institutions despise liability. If their compliance department caught wind of fraud litigation or contested authority, they would place a hard hold on the $2.8 million. The money would sit in legal purgatory while attorneys billed hourly rates to argue over my sanity in a Nevada courtroom. The funds would be trapped and my independence would be delayed indefinitely. That outcome was unacceptable. I did not want a messy emotional spectacle playing out in the public record. I did not want Brenda to have a stage to perform her victim routine. To defeat a gambler, you do not flip the card table and call security. You let them place all their chips on a wheel you have already rigged. I wanted an airtight, silent financial victory. I wanted to execute a flawless surgical extraction of my assets, leaving my mother holding a forged document for a vault that no longer existed. My network code was perfect, and my forensic evidence was secure. To bypass a legal trap drafted by a predatory lawyer, I needed an equally ruthless legal architecture. I needed a countermeasure designed to catch the trust funds the millisecond the clock struck midnight on my 21st birthday. I needed to build a corporate entity that Brenda could not touch. I knew exactly who to call. I needed the man who had drafted my father's original trust. To counter a legal trap drafted by a predatory lawyer, I needed an architecture of my own. I needed someone who understood the structural integrity of a contract the same way I understood the architecture of a secure network. I needed Gideon Shaw. Gideon was my late father's estate attorney. He operated out of a modest brick building in downtown Las Vegas, far away from the neon lights and the towering casino resorts that defined the Strip. My father chose Gideon because the man despised the culture of easy money and handshake deals. Gideon dealt in quiet, ironclad certainty. He was a 62-year-old legal traditionalist who wore tailored wool suits in the desert heat and kept his files in locked fireproof cabinets. When my father was dying, he trusted Gideon to build the trust fund that would protect me from my mother's spending habits. I took a scheduled personal day from my firm and drove to his office on a Wednesday morning. The waiting room smelled of old paper and leather polish. His paralegal recognized me and ushered me directly into his inner office. Gideon sat behind a wide mahogany desk surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. He took off his wire-rimmed reading glasses when I sat down. He looked at me with the same measured, calculating expression my father used to wear. He noted that I had not visited his office since the reading of the will a decade ago, and asked what prompted the sudden appearance. I did not offer small talk. I reached into my bag, retrieved the encrypted flash drive, and placed it on the polished wood of his desk. I told him my mother had retained external counsel to breach the trust fund, and I had the digital evidence to prove it. Gideon did not show surprise. A career in estate law in a city built on vice had long ago stripped him of any illusions regarding human nature. He plugged the flash drive into a standalone laptop he kept isolated from his primary network. I gave him the decryption key. For the next 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the steady, rhythmic click of Gideon scrolling through the files. He read the intercepted email chain between Brenda and Tiffany. He reviewed the petition for temporary conservatorship authored by Caldwell. Then he opened the final draft of the durable power of attorney. He stared at the signature on the final page. I handed him a printed copy of the metadata report I had generated. The report detailed the file creation timestamps, the user access logs from the rose gold tablet, and the precise visual degradation proving the signature had been cropped and pasted from my old high school financial aid application. Gideon leaned back in his chair and folded his hands over his stomach. He looked at the screen and then looked at me. His expression was a mixture of professional disgust for Caldwell's unethical maneuvering and deep clinical respect for my evidence gathering. "Your father always said you had a mind for structure," Gideon said quietly. "You have built a flawless chain of custody here, Victoria. Most people facing this kind of domestic betrayal act on emotion. They confront the aggressor and destroy their own leverage. You treated this like a crime scene." I told him I treated it like a network intrusion. I asked him if the forged document was enough to have Caldwell disbarred and my mother arrested. Gideon picked up a gold fountain pen and tapped it against his desk. He explained the reality of the legal system with cold precision. He told me that presenting this evidence to the authorities would certainly initiate a criminal fraud investigation, but that path carried a catastrophic secondary effect. Vanguard Heritage, the institution holding the $2.8 million, operated under strict risk management protocols. If they received a notification of a pending criminal investigation regarding forged authority or contested mental competence, their compliance department would immediately freeze the account. The money would be locked in escrow, Gideon explained. The bank would file an interpleader action refusing to release the funds until a judge untangled the mess. You would spend the next 3 years of your life sitting in deposition rooms, while Caldwell argued that your mother was simply a concerned parent trying to protect an unstable daughter. You would have no access to your capital to pay for your own defense. Your mother is gambling that you lack the resources to endure a war of attrition. The ticking clock became deafeningly loud. I had less than 14 days until my 21st birthday. Brenda planned to submit the forged power of attorney to the bank the moment the calendar turned. If she filed her paperwork even an hour before I initiated a transfer, the fraud alert would trigger the freeze. The system was designed to protect the bank from liability, not to protect the beneficiary from their own family. I asked Gideon how we patched the vulnerability. I needed a mechanism that would bypass the freeze entirely. Gideon opened a fresh legal pad and drew a straight line down the center of the page. He told me that defending the current account was a flawed strategy. If a fortress is compromised, you do not stand at the gate and fight. You empty the vault and abandon the fortress before the enemy arrives. "We are going to build a corporate ghost," Gideon said. He outlined the blueprint for the countermeasure. Nevada possesses some of the most robust corporate privacy and asset protection laws in the country. Gideon proposed establishing a new limited liability company. We would call it Ironclad Arch. The company would be legally structured to obscure its ownership from public databases, but I would serve as the sole managing member. Simultaneously, Gideon would draft a new irrevocable corporate trust. Ironclad Arch would serve as the holding entity for this new trust. We would open fresh, heavily encrypted commercial bank accounts under the corporate name at a completely different financial institution. The genius of the strategy lay in the timing. The original trust established by my father was legally mandated to vest to me at exactly 1 minute past midnight on the day of my 21st birthday. At that precise moment, the restrictions on the account would evaporate. For a fraction of a second, the money would sit unprotected in the Vanguard Heritage portal waiting for instructions. I would not wait for the bank to open its doors the next morning. I would not wait for Brenda to walk into a branch lobby with her forged papers. Gideon instructed me to sign a series of preemptive legal authorizations right there in his office. These documents granted me the immediate, unmitigated authority to execute a total asset transfer the second I reached the legal age of majority. I would log into the portal at midnight and initiate an automated clearinghouse wire transfer routing the entire $2.8 million into the Ironclad Arch corporate vault. By the time the sun came up and your mother contacts the bank to execute her forged power of attorney, Gideon explained the original account will possess a balance of 0. Caldwell's legal trap will snap shut on an empty room. They cannot freeze funds that are no longer within their jurisdiction. And because Ironclad Arch will be shielded behind layers of corporate privacy, they will not even know where the capital went. I watched Gideon sketch the flow of assets on his legal pad. The architecture was brilliant. It was a digital heist executed in reverse. I was going to steal my own inheritance from the people trying to rob me. I signed the formation documents for the new company. I felt the physical drag of the pen across the heavy paper, contrasting it with the cheap digital forgery my mother had crafted. The ink soaked into the page, securing my autonomy. Gideon took the documents and promised to expedite the state filings. He assured me the corporate accounts would be active and ready to receive the wire transfer within a week. I left the law office and stepped back out into the blinding Nevada sun. The heat radiated off the pavement, but my mind was operating with crystalline focus. The legal architecture was now in place to match my digital perimeter. The trap was fully constructed. All I had to do was survive the next 2 weeks living under the same roof as the women planning my ruin. I had to go back to the house, look my mother in the eye, and pretend I was nothing more than a naive child waiting to be sheared. The real test of my security protocol was about to begin. 14 days remained until the calendar turned and my father's temporal lock dissolved. The margin for error was non-existent. I treated the legal and financial logistics with the same sterile precision I applied to a server migration. Gideon Shaw filed the Articles of Organization for Ironclad Arch the morning following my visit to his office. The state of Nevada processed the corporate registration within 48 hours. I drove to a commercial banking branch located on the outer edge of Summerlin. This institution catered exclusively to corporate clients and high-net-worth individuals. The lobby smelled of polished stone and cold air conditioning, a sharp contrast to the baking desert heat outside. A senior account manager named David escorted me into a glass-walled office. I presented the freshly stamped corporate filings, the employer identification number, and my own government credentials. I instructed David to establish a primary holding account and a secondary operational account. I declined the standard debit cards and checkbooks. I required 0 external access points. Instead, I mandated a dual-layer biometric authentication protocol for any outbound wire transfers. Voice recognition matched with a secondary fingerprint scan. The vault was designed to receive funds seamlessly, but releasing those funds would require my physical biological presence. David slid a stack of signature cards across the desk. I picked up the heavy brass pen he offered. The ink flowed thick and dark across the textured paper. I felt the friction of the metal nib against the page. It was a tangible, undeniable action. I thought about the crude JPEG artifacting on the document Brenda had stored in her cloud drive. My mother had stolen a ghost of my identity from a high school financial aid form. I was embedding my living, breathing identity into a fortress she did not even know existed. I returned to Gideon's office the next day to finalize the connective tissue of the trap. We sat in the quiet library drafting the automated clearinghouse routing instructions. I logged into the Vanguard Heritage portal using a secure terminal. The interface displayed the $2.8 million balance grayed out and locked behind the age restriction. I linked the new Ironclad Arch corporate routing numbers to the Vanguard profile. I initiated a pending transfer order. The system required a scheduled execution date. I selected the exact date of my 21st birthday, setting the execution parameter to trigger at 1 minute past midnight. The screen displayed a green confirmation checkmark. The routing was established. The destination was verified. The moment the clock struck 12, the entire balance would flood out of the vulnerable trust and slam into the biometric vault of Ironclad Arch. The Vanguard account would hit 0 before the sun rose. With the digital architecture complete, I faced the most grueling phase of the operation. I had to go back to the house in Henderson and live alongside the threat actors. I parked my car in the driveway, taking a steadying breath before turning the key in the front door. The air inside the house felt different now. The hostility had evolved into a predatory anticipation. Growing up, Brenda never planned for the future. She lived week to week, relying on credit extensions and the charity of relatives she eventually alienated. Her financial strategy was always a desperate scramble to cover yesterday's mistakes. Now she believed she was standing at the threshold of permanent, unearned wealth. That belief manifested in bizarre, tangible ways around the house. On a Tuesday evening, I walked into the living room to find Brenda holding a metal tape measure. She was stretching the yellow tape across the length of the floor, muttering dimensions to herself. I stood near the hallway arch, asking what she was doing. She smiled, a tight, secretive smile that barely shifted the lines around her mouth. She said she was thinking about updating the space, A custom Italian leather sectional may be removing the popcorn ceiling. She wrote the measurements in a small notebook. I recognized the brand of the notebook. It was an expensive planner she had purchased recently. She was logging the dimensions of her fantasy. She was spending phantom money. 2 days later, the delusion spread to Tiffany. I walked past the kitchen island and saw my sister hunched over her laptop. The screen displayed a luxury real estate website. She was browsing high-rise condominiums near the Las Vegas Strip, properties with floor-to-ceiling windows and private elevator access, places that required a 20% down payment on $1 million listing. Brad was standing behind her, pointing at a photo of a rooftop terrace, claiming it would be the perfect venue to host investors for his imaginary software company. Tiffany nodded, tracing the edge of the trackpad. She said they needed to be ready to make an all-cash offer to beat the market competition. I poured a glass of water from the refrigerator and watched them. They were building castles in the sky using my father's life savings as the foundation. The level of entitlement was staggering. Tiffany had $85,000 of unsecured debt dragging down her credit profile. She could not afford the maintenance fees on a luxury condo, let alone the principal. Yet she was picking out terrace furniture. She believed the forged power of attorney drafted by Caldwell was a guaranteed key to the vault. The psychological weight of existing in that environment was profound. Every interaction required a calculated performance. I had to maintain the persona of the oblivious, introverted daughter. I kept my gaze lowered. I spoke in short, non-committal sentences. I retreated to my bedroom early in the evenings, allowing them to continue their plotting without interruption. I listened to the muffled sounds of their discussions through the thin drywall. I heard Brenda on phone calls with interior designers scheduling consultations for the week following my birthday. I heard Tiffany booking appointments with real estate brokers. It was like watching two people assemble a parachute while jumping out of an airplane, entirely unaware that they were holding a backpack full of rocks. I did not feel pity. I did not feel the urge to warn them. The metadata on the forged signature had erased any lingering sense of familial obligation. I simply observed their descent with the clinical detachment of an analyst watching malware detonate inside an isolated sandbox environment. The silence in the house, however, began to shift into something far more cloying. As the calendar ticked down from 14 days to 7, Brenda realized that a continued atmosphere of hostility might trigger suspicion. If I felt threatened, I might attempt to contact the bank or secure my own funds prematurely. To ensure I remained docile and unaware, she enacted a swift and disorienting change in tactics. The cold dismissals evaporated. The subtle glares vanished. Brenda pivoted to a suffocating artificial sweetness designed to lull me into compliance. The trap was laid, but the bait still needed to be offered. The final week would require me to navigate a psychological minefield of fake affection and performative maternal warmth, all while protecting the secret that would ruin them both. The transition from hostility to affection is the most dangerous phase of any social engineering attack. When a threat actor realizes that intimidation has failed to yield the desired access credentials, they pivot to building rapport. They fabricate a scenario designed to lower your defenses and manufacture a false sense of trust. In the cybersecurity industry, we call this pretexting. Inside the house in Henderson, I just called it Tuesday morning. 7 days before my 21st birthday, the heavy silence that had suffocated our home abruptly vanished. I walked into the kitchen at 7 in the morning, preparing to make my usual cup of instant coffee before driving to the office. Brenda was already awake. She stood by the granite island, wearing a silk robe with a fresh pot of expensive dark roast brewing on the counter. She turned when she heard my footsteps and offered a smile so bright and uncharacteristic it felt like staring directly into a halogen lamp. She poured a cup, pushed it toward me, and asked how my projects at work were going. For 2 years, she had referred to my career as playing on computers. Now she was asking about my projects. I took the mug, feeling the ceramic heat against my palms. I gave her a generic answer about network audits and compliance protocols. She nodded enthusiastically, pretending to understand, pretending to care. I drank the coffee and matched her smile. If she wanted to play a game of deception, she was sitting across from someone who read source code for a living. I could play the compliant daughter flawlessly. The performance escalated on Wednesday evening. I returned from the office to find Brenda waiting in the living room with a brightly colored plastic bag resting on the coffee table. She gestured for me to sit down. She said she knew my birthday was still a few days away, but she wanted to give me a little something early to start the celebration. She handed me the bag. I pulled out a generic bath and body set. It consisted of a lavender-scented body wash, a small bottle of lotion, and a mesh shower sponge, shrink wrapped together in a cardboard basket. The plastic bow was crushed on one side. I turned the basket over and saw the red clearance sticker still attached to the bottom. $15. I looked up from the clearance tag and met her eyes. "Thank you, Mom," I said, keeping my voice infused with just enough gratitude to satisfy her ego. "It smells nice." She waved her hand dismissively, telling me I deserved a little pampering. Then, without taking a breath, she picked up her rose gold tablet and swiped to a digital vision board. She tilted the screen toward me to show off a gallery of imported quartzite slabs and custom oak cabinetry. She announced she was finalizing the budget for a comprehensive kitchen and master bathroom remodel. She casually dropped the estimated cost into the conversation. $100,000. The mathematics of betrayal were laid bare on the coffee table. $15 for the daughter providing the capital, $100,000 for the mother conspiring to steal it. She was bragging about spending my father's legacy while handing me clearance aisle soap. I smiled, told her the quartzite looked beautiful, and carried my cheap lotion to my bedroom. I set it on the nightstand where it remained untouched, a physical monument to her exact valuation of my worth. By Thursday morning, the pretexting phase moved into the logistical setup. Brenda approached me as I was tying my shoes by the front door. She held up a glossy promotional brochure for a high-end steakhouse located inside a premier casino on the Las Vegas Strip. The venue was famous for dry-aged Wagyu beef crystal chandeliers and an atmosphere that dripped with aggressive wealth. "I want to take the whole family out for your birthday dinner," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "A real celebration. You are stepping into adulthood, Victoria. It is time we treated you like an adult." I looked at the brochure. A dinner for 4 people at that establishment would easily exceed $1,000. Brenda did not have $1,000 of disposable income. She was intending to put the meal on a credit card, fully believing she would pay it off the following week with my stolen inheritance. She was framing the dinner as a loving rite of passage. I knew it was a theater built for an ambush. She chose a public, opulent setting because she assumed I would be too intimidated by the environment to cause a scene when she finally pushed her forged legal documents across the table. She wanted me disoriented by the luxury surrounded by waiters and clinking glass, so I would sign whatever she demanded just to escape the awkwardness. "That sounds wonderful, Mom," I said, keeping my posture relaxed and submissive. "I would love that." She beamed a look of pure predatory satisfaction crossing her features. She told me she would make the reservation for 8 o'clock on the night of my birthday. I thanked her again and walked out to my car. The weekend arrived, bringing the final Sunday dinner before the deadline. Tiffany and Brad came over. The dining table was set with Brenda's good china. The meal was an elaborate roast, a sharp departure from the usual casual takeout. The air in the room was thick with giddy anticipation. Tiffany wore a new designer blouse with the tags likely still tucked inside the collar, waiting to be returned after she took her photos. Brad spent the first 20 minutes of the meal talking loudly about seed capital and aggressive expansion strategies for his non-existent software company. I sat at my usual spot at the end of the table, eating my food and watching them. I was no longer a participant in their family dynamic. I was a clinician observing a psychological study. I weaponized my silence, providing brief, agreeable nods whenever they paused for breath. Brad raised his wine glass, holding it high so the dining room light caught the crystal. To new beginnings, he announced, looking directly at Tiffany. To closing funding rounds and scaling the summit. Tiffany raised her glass of Chardonnay, her eyes shining with unearned triumph. To securing the future, she added. Brenda raised her glass, joining the toast. She turned to me, her smile stretching wide. To adulthood, Victoria. I picked up my glass of tap water and tapped it against the rim of my mother's wine glass. To adulthood, I echoed. The physical toll of maintaining a blank face while listening to 3 people toast to my financial ruin was immense. It required a conscious suppression of every natural instinct. I focused my attention on the micro expressions betraying their forced calm. Brenda wore a thick silver ring on her right index finger. Whenever Brad mentioned money or Tiffany discussed real estate, Brenda's thumb would slide over the metal, twisting the ring in slow, repetitive circles. It was a nervous, greedy tell. I watched her eyes. When she smiled at me, the muscles around her eyes remained entirely static. The warmth was localized strictly to the lower half of her face, a mechanical rendering of affection with no biological sincerity behind it. In the information security industry, we utilize a tool called a sandbox. A sandbox is an isolated testing environment separate from the main operating system. When we discover a suspected virus, we do not delete it immediately. We place the malicious code inside the sandbox and allow it to detonate. We watch what files it tries to corrupt. We monitor its behavior to understand its programming without risking the health of the host network. The house in Henderson had become my personal sandbox. I sat at that dining table, watching my mother and my sister detonate their greed. I let them talk about their luxury condos and their startup capital. I let them perform their fake affection. I absorbed their smiles and their toasts, knowing that the malicious code was successfully quarantined. They could run their programs in this isolated environment all they wanted. They could never touch the root system. The firewall was already in place. The corporate accounts at Ironclad Arch were sitting empty and waiting. Sunday faded into Monday. Monday bled into Tuesday. The clock ticked down with merciless precision. Every time Brenda twisted her silver ring, I counted the hours remaining. Every time Tiffany texted my mother about furniture deliveries, I checked the battery life on my encrypted laptop. I played the decoy flawlessly, offering no resistance, no suspicion, and no deviations from my routine. They believed they had won. They believed the table was set and the payout was guaranteed. The sun set on the final day. I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I set my bag on the floor and opened my laptop. The countdown had reached its final sequence. The eve of my 21st birthday had arrived and the vault was ready to open. I just had to be the first one through the door. The evening before my 21st birthday arrived with a suffocating heaviness. The desert air outside the window was stagnant, but the atmosphere inside the Henderson house felt pressurized. Brenda and Tiffany spent the afternoon finalizing their outfits for the steakhouse dinner, speaking in hushed, excited tones. They were vibrating with the kind of nervous energy that accompanies a high-stakes bet right before the dealer reveals the final card. I retreated to my bedroom shortly after 8 o'clock, claiming a mild headache. Brenda did not argue. She merely offered a sympathetic nod and reminded me to be ready by 7 the next evening. I closed my bedroom door, engaged the manual lock, and retrieved my laptop from its secure storage location. I sat cross-legged on my mattress. The only illumination came from the stark white glow of my monitors, reflecting against the beige walls. The digital clock in the corner of my screen read 11:15. 46 minutes remained until midnight. 46 minutes until the legal barrier established by my late father would evaporate. 46 minutes until $2.8 million sat unprotected in the Vanguard Heritage portal. My father was a structural engineer. He designed load-bearing supports for commercial buildings. He understood the mathematics of stress and fatigue. When he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, he attempted to engineer a similar support structure for my future. He established the trust fund because he knew Brenda possessed the financial discipline of a hurricane. He built a temporal lock into the account, assuming that by age 21, I would possess the maturity to manage the capital. He did not anticipate that Brenda would attempt to bypass the lock by declaring me mentally unfit. He designed the vault to open automatically. He never imagined someone else would be standing at the door holding a forged key. I initiated a final diagnostic sweep of the residential network. The logs confirmed that the rose gold tablet was idle. Brenda was likely asleep, dreaming of imported quartzite and luxury vehicles. I launched a virtual private network, tunneling my connection through a secure server farm located 3,000 miles away. I needed my digital footprint to be entirely untraceable from this local access point. 11:30. The silence in the house was profound. The central air conditioning cycled off, leaving only the faint hum of the laptop fan. I could hear my own breathing, steady and even. I felt no fear. I felt the specific, distinct focus that accompanies the final stages of a complex deployment protocol. The preparation was complete. The code was compiled. All that remained was the execution. 11:45. I opened the Vanguard Heritage Secure Portal. The landing page required multi-factor authentication. I inputted my credentials, completed the secondary verification, and navigated to the primary dashboard. The balance displayed in bold black text: $2,814,312.40. Below the balance, a red banner read, "Restricted access, age verification pending." The system recognized my credentials, but the disbursement protocol remained locked until the chronological parameter was met. 11:50. I pulled up a secondary window displaying the corporate holding account for Ironclad Arch. The balance sat at 0. The routing numbers were verified. The automated clearinghouse transfer instructions were pre-loaded. I rested my fingers on the keyboard. The physiological response to impending finality is fascinating. My vision tunneled, focusing entirely on the digital readout. The ambient noise of the room faded into insignificance. I was no longer a daughter sitting in her childhood bedroom. I was an operator executing a critical system migration. 11:55. 5 minutes. The margin for error was shrinking. If Brenda had somehow managed to submit the forged durable power of attorney early, the system might flag a dual access attempt. If Caldwell had utilized an expedited filing procedure, the account could already be frozen. I had built the best defense possible, but until the transaction cleared, nothing was guaranteed. 11:58, 2 minutes. I refreshed the Vanguard portal. The red restriction banner remained active. I checked the Ironclad Arch connection. The receiving channel was open. 11:59, 1 minute. I placed my right thumb against the biometric scanner connected to my laptop port. The sensor glowed blue, waiting for the final authorization. Midnight. The calendar turned. 12:01. I refreshed the Vanguard portal. The red restriction banner vanished. The text transitioned from gray to solid green. The account was fully vested. The capital was unprotected. I clicked the transfer initiation button. A dialog box materialized, demanding confirmation. I pressed my thumb firmly against the biometric sensor. The hardware authenticated my identity. A secondary prompt required a voice authorization passphrase. I leaned closer to the microphone. Protocol execution confirmed. I spoke the words in a flat, precise tone. The system accepted the inputs. A progress bar appeared on the screen, tracking the routing process. 10%, 30%, 50%. The data packets were moving through the financial network, severing my father's legacy from the Vanguard institution. 70%, 90%. The progress bar completed its journey. The screen refreshed. The Vanguard Heritage dashboard updated. The bold black text shifted. The new balance read $0.00. I swapped to the Ironclad Arch corporate portal. The holding account reflected an incoming automated clearinghouse wire transfer. The status read, pending verification. 10 seconds later, the status changed to cleared. The balance updated, $2,814,312.40. The extraction was successful. The money was gone from the vulnerable trust and securely locked behind the impenetrable firewall of a Nevada corporate entity. The trap my mother and sister had spent months designing was now set to snap shut on an empty vault. I exhaled a long, slow breath. The tension that had coiled in my shoulders for the past 14 days finally released. I shut down the virtual private network, cleared the browser cache, and powered off the laptop. The room returned to complete darkness. The financial maneuver was complete, but the physical extraction still required execution. I could not remain in this house once the truth was revealed. I retrieved a small, nondescript duffel bag from my closet. I packed exactly 3 days' worth of essential clothing, my passport, and my encrypted flash drive. I did not pack photographs. I did not pack sentimental items. I took nothing that tied me to the history of this household. I placed the duffel bag near the bedroom door. I was scheduled to leave for the office at 7 in the morning. I would take the bag with me, storing it in the trunk of my car. Following the birthday dinner at the steakhouse, I would drive directly to an extended stay hotel I had booked under a corporate alias. I would never sleep in this room again. I lay down on the mattress, pulling the blanket over my chest. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the invisible lines of the architecture I had built. Tomorrow, Brenda would walk into a high-end casino restaurant, wearing an expensive dress, expecting to corner a naive 21-year-old. She would slide a forged legal document across a white tablecloth, demanding access to a fortune she believed was waiting for her. She had no idea the game was already over. She had no idea the house had already lost. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept without waking. The Las Vegas Strip is a monument to the mathematics of probability. Every resort, every flashing marquee, every sprawling gaming floor is meticulously engineered to separate desperate individuals from their capital. The architecture is deliberate. There are no clocks on the walls and no windows to reveal the passing of time. The environment is designed to distort reality, fostering a hypnotic state where rational decision-making dissolves into a euphoric trance of anticipated wealth. I navigated the crowded casino floor at 7:45 in the evening, carrying my single overnight duffel bag. I checked the bag with the bell desk near the hotel lobby, securing the claim ticket in my wallet. I walked toward the steakhouse unencumbered. The ambient noise of the casino washed over me, a chaotic symphony of chiming slot machines, cheers from the craps tables, and the steady thrum of artificial oxygen pumped through the ventilation system. I observed the patrons feeding $100 bills into machines programmed with an insurmountable house edge. They all possessed the same glazed, hungry expression my mother wore when she discussed my trust fund. The steakhouse was located deep inside the resort, insulated from the frantic energy of the main floor. The entrance featured towering doors crafted from imported mahogany and polished brass. A host wearing a tailored suit greeted me, checking my name against a leather-bound reservation book. He escorted me through the main dining room, where the air was thick with the scent of seared Wagyu beef, roasted bone marrow, and expensive cologne. We arrived at a private dining enclosure tucked away in the back of the restaurant. Heavy velvet curtains separated the space from the rest of the patrons. A long rectangular table occupied the center of the room, covered in crisp white linen and set with heavy crystal glassware. My family was already present. Brenda sat at the head of the table, commanding the room with the practiced authority of a reigning monarch. She wore a new emerald green dress that still bore the faint creases of recent unboxing. Tiffany sat to her right, draped in a designer silk blouse, tapping rapidly on her smartphone screen. Brad occupied the seat next to Tiffany, leaning back with his ankle resting on his knee, projecting the unearned confidence of a man spending someone else's fortune. Brenda had also invited my Uncle David and Aunt Susan. They were my father's older sibling and his wife, people who resided in an affluent suburb of Summerlin and lived entirely to avoid discomfort. David and Susan were classic enablers. They valued polite conversation over factual accuracy. They attended holiday dinners, brought expensive wine, and nodded along to whatever narrative Brenda presented, because challenging her required an emotional exertion they simply refused to expend. They were the perfect audience for my mother's impending theater. I took the designated seat near the center of the table. Brenda smiled at me, a wide, gleaming display of ceramic veneers. She gestured for the sommelier to approach. "We are celebrating a very important milestone tonight," Brenda announced, her voice projecting across the quiet room. "My youngest daughter is officially 21. We need your finest vintage." The sommelier nodded, producing a bottle of vintage champagne that cost more than a standard monthly car payment. The pop of the cork echoed against the acoustic paneling. The waiter circled the table, pouring the pale gold liquid into the crystal flutes. When he reached my setting, I placed my hand over the rim of the glass. I requested sparkling water with a slice of lime. Brenda offered a patronizing chuckle. "Come now, Victoria. You are an adult today. One glass will not hurt you." "I require a clear head tonight, Mom," I replied, maintaining a flat, even tone. "The sparkling water is fine." She waved her hand dismissively, allowing the waiter to fill my glass with carbonated water. The ice cubes clinked against the crystal, a sharp, clean sound amidst the murmurs of conversation. The first course arrived, featuring iced oysters, tuna tartare, and a towering arrangement of chilled seafood. The conversation around the table mirrored the decadence of the food. Brad initiated a lengthy monologue regarding a commercial real estate venture he planned to launch in the upcoming quarter. He threw around terms like venture capital and aggressive scaling with the casual arrogance of a man who had never successfully balanced a ledger. Tiffany interjected to describe the floor plan of the luxury condominium she had toured earlier that afternoon. She detailed the panoramic views of the city skyline and the imported marble countertops. I sat quietly severing a small piece of tuna with my fork. I chewed the food, tasting the citrus and soy, but my focus remained locked on their behavior. They were intoxicated by the proximity to wealth. They were dining in a room that catered to millionaires eating food prepared for billionaires, and they believed they possessed the resources to maintain this lifestyle indefinitely. They were spending phantom currency. They were placing massive bets with chips they did not realize were counterfeit. As the waiters cleared the appetizer plates and prepared the table for the main course, Brenda tapped her silver spoon against the side of her champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound commanded immediate silence. David and Susan ceased their quiet discussion about a recent golf tournament. Tiffany locked her smartphone screen. Brad sat up straight, adjusting his posture to convey respect. Brenda stood up from her chair at the head of the table. She smoothed the fabric of her emerald dress and raised her glass. The amber light from the chandelier cast a warm, flattering glow across her features. She looked the part of the devoted, successful matriarch. "I want to propose a toast," she began, her voice modulating into a tone of deep, artificial reverence. 21 years ago, this family was blessed with Victoria. It has not always been an easy journey. We have faced our share of challenges since Douglas passed. We have weathered storms, and we have leaned on each other. She paused, scanning the faces of her audience, ensuring she held their undivided attention. David nodded solemnly. Susan offered a sympathetic smile. "But through it all, we have remained a family," Brenda continued. "Victoria, you have always been the quiet one, the observant one. Sometimes I worry you spend too much time isolated in your own world. But tonight is about bringing you into ours. Tonight is about stepping into the real world and securing the future. Your father left a legacy, and it is my profound duty to ensure that legacy is protected, guided, and managed with the wisdom this family provides. To Victoria, and to a secure, prosperous future." To Victoria, the table echoed. The crystal flutes met in the center of the table, chiming in a synchronized chorus of approval. Brad took a generous swallow of his champagne. Tiffany beamed a predatory smile directed at my face. David and Susan drank their wine, entirely oblivious to the sinister subtext woven into my mother's words. I raised my glass of sparkling water, acknowledging the toast with a slow, deliberate nod. I took a sip, feeling the carbonation burn pleasantly against the back of my throat. The sheer irony of the setting was magnificent. We were sitting in a fortress built by a corporation that profited from human delusion. The casino floor beyond our velvet curtains was filled with individuals convinced they could outsmart a mathematical certainty. Brenda was executing the exact same flawed logic. She had engineered a highly sophisticated social performance, believing her manipulation could override the unalterable code I had executed 12 hours earlier. The main course arrived on heavy porcelain plates. Prime ribeye steaks, seared to a perfect medium rare, resting in pools of truffle butter. Roasted asparagus and wild mushrooms filled the center of the table. The aroma was rich, earthy, and heavy. The dinner progressed through the entrees. The conversation shifted back to trivial matters. Susan discussed a charity gala she was organizing. David debated the merits of various luxury sedans with Brad. Tiffany covertly checked her social media engagement beneath the edge of the tablecloth. I ate my steak, mechanically segmenting the meat into precise uniform pieces. I tracked the passage of time, noting the subtle shift in Brenda's posture as the meal neared its conclusion. The empty plates were cleared away by silent, efficient waiters. The dessert menus were distributed, but Brenda waved them off. She requested a round of espresso for the table, indicating that the celebratory portion of the evening had concluded and the business transaction was about to commence. The waiter poured the dark, steaming coffee into delicate ceramic cups and quietly exited the private enclosure, pulling the heavy velvet curtains shut behind him. We were sealed inside the room. The ambient noise from the restaurant faded into an indistinct hum. The air grew still. Brenda reached down to the floor beside her chair. I watched her hand grasp the handle of her designer handbag. I felt the slow, steady rhythm of my own pulse. The waiting period was over. The trap was armed, and the threat actor was reaching for the trigger. The heavy velvet curtains sealing our private dining enclosure absorbed the faint sounds of the casino floor, leaving only the clinking of porcelain coffee cups and the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. Brenda withdrew her hand from her designer bag. She placed a thick manila envelope onto the white linen tablecloth. The object landed with a dull thud. It was the same envelope I had seen resting on the kitchen counter in Henderson just days ago. My mother adjusted her posture, shifting from the role of a celebratory host into a rehearsed maternal authority. The artificial warmth drained from her features, replaced by a cold, calculating smirk. She rested her elbows on the table, interlacing her fingers over the sealed paper. "Victoria, honey, we are rearranging your accounts tomorrow," she announced. Her tone was steady and practice stripped of any negotiation. I kept my hands resting in my lap. I did not lean forward. I did not display a single flicker of surprise. "I have had the lawyers draw up some management paperwork," Brenda continued, gesturing vaguely toward the envelope. "Caldwell and Associates. They specialize in family estate preservation. You just need to sign these final authorizations tonight so I can handle the investments moving forward. It is simply too much burden for a 21-year-old to manage alone." She slid the envelope across the smooth linen. It stopped mere inches from my sparkling water. The performance was seamlessly choreographed. Tiffany immediately chimed in, picking up her predetermined cue. She leaned across her empty dessert plate, radiating weaponized concern. "Mom is right, Vicky," Tiffany said, softening her voice to sound sympathetic. "You should not have to stress about complex finances or tax liabilities at your age. You have your tech projects to focus on. Let Mom carry the heavy lifting. It is the responsible choice for the family." Brad nodded enthusiastically, taking a slow sip of his espresso. He looked at the manila envelope the way a starving man stares at a meal. He was not looking at legal paperwork. He was looking at the seed capital for his doomed software venture. He offered a tight, affirming smile, reinforcing the united front. The extended family provided the final layer of validation. Uncle David cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. David had spent his entire life avoiding confrontation, preferring the quiet comfort of his country club memberships over the messy reality of holding his sister accountable. "Estate management is a labyrinth," Victoria. David offered, his voice thick with unearned wisdom. "It requires a seasoned perspective to navigate the tax codes and investment vehicles. I allow my broker to handle all my equities. It frees the mind. It truly does." Aunt Susan murmured her agreement, taking a delicate sip from her cup. They were the perfect chorus. They provided the social proof Brenda needed to legitimize her theft. They sat in this opulent room drinking champagne purchased on credit and validated a felony because challenging my mother required a moral stamina none of them possessed. Brenda watched my face, waiting for a reaction. She expected confusion. She anticipated perhaps a mild resistance that she could quickly squash with a guilt trip about my father's legacy. She expected me to reach for the clasp, open the flap, and blindly sign the pages just to alleviate the suffocating pressure of a table full of elders telling me what to do. I did not touch the envelope. I did not speak. I let the physical weight of my silence fill the room. The silence stretched past the boundaries of social comfort. 10 seconds elapsed, then 20. The ambient hum of the air conditioning seemed to amplify. The ice in my water glass shifted and cracked. In my profession, we observe how threat actors respond when a payload fails to execute. They usually panic and attempt to force the command. Brenda's smirk faltered a fraction of an inch. The static silence was not in her script. She needed me to comply, so she filled the void with more pressure. "The durable power of attorney is already in motion," Brenda stated, her tone hardening. "I filed the preliminary notices with the bank earlier today. They are expecting these final signed authorizations by tomorrow morning to finalize the transfer of authority. This is merely a formality to ensure a smooth transition of the portfolio." She lied with breathtaking ease. She had not filed any preliminary notices because Vanguard Heritage required biometric confirmation for any status changes on a restricted account. She was attempting to fabricate a sense of inevitability. She wanted me to believe the machinery was already moving, and my signature was nothing more than a procedural requirement to finalize a done deal. I looked at the thick paper resting on the table. I knew exactly what resided inside that envelope. I knew the petition for temporary conservatorship was printed on premium stock. I knew the forged signature cropped from a financial aid application sat at the bottom of the 14th page. I knew the metadata confirming the forgery was safely locked in an offline drive in my possession. I looked back at my mother. Her silver ring caught the light from the chandelier. She was twisting it around her index finger, a slow, repetitive motion, betraying the anxiety she was trying so desperately to conceal. She was sitting at a table in a casino steakhouse, believing she held all the winning cards. She thought the trap was sprung. She thought she had outsmarted the quiet daughter who fixed her computers and stayed out of her way. I glanced at Tiffany, who was now biting the inside of her cheek. I looked at Brad, whose confident posture was beginning to rigidify under the prolonged silence. I looked at David and Susan, who suddenly found the remaining drops of their espresso fascinating, avoiding my gaze entirely. They had constructed an elaborate theater designed to strip me of my independence and my father's legacy. They had chosen a public gilded venue, assuming the luxury would intimidate me into submission. They believed they were the architects of a brilliant financial coup. I sat perfectly still, feeling the cool condensation on the outside of my water glass. The meal was finished. The champagne was gone. The grand illusion had reached its final act. It was time to show them that the house they thought they were playing in did not belong to them at all. I reached into my own leather tote bag resting on the floor beside my chair. My hand closed around a much thinner envelope I had prepared earlier that afternoon. The moment of observation was over. The countermeasure was ready to deploy. I reached into my leather tote bag and withdrew a slim white envelope. The contrast between my mother's bloated manila folder and my crisp single envelope was stark. I placed it on the white linen tablecloth. I applied light pressure with my fingertips, pushing it directly across the surface until it rested precisely next to hers. I looked into my mother's eyes. "You do not need to manage the accounts, Mom," I said. My voice was a flat, unbroken line. "The balance is zero." Brenda's hand froze over the table. The twisting motion of her silver ring halted abruptly. She stared at me, and then looked down at the white envelope. The predatory confidence that had anchored her posture just moments before began to fracture. Tiffany let out a short, dismissive breath, breaking the silence. "What are you talking about, Vicky? Stop playing games and just sign the papers. Brad needs that capital cleared by next week." I did not look at Tiffany. I kept my gaze locked on Brenda. "Open it," I instructed. Brenda hesitated. For a woman who treated life like a slot machine, she suddenly seemed terrified to pull the lever. Her manicured fingers reached out and broke the thin seal. She pulled out 3 pieces of paper. They were not bound by legal covers or stamped by expensive attorneys. They were standard printer paper holding unalterable data. "Read the first page," I said. Brenda looked down. Her eyes scanned the top line. The color drained from her cheeks in a slow, sweeping retreat, leaving her skin looking like old parchment. Her mouth opened, but she produced no sound. "That is a transaction receipt from Vanguard Heritage." I explained, my tone clinical and detached. "You will notice the timestamp in the upper right corner. It reads 12:01 this morning. Exactly 1 minute after my 21st birthday began. The transfer amount is $2,814,312.40. Brad leaned over Tiffany's shoulder, straining to see the document. "Wait, what does that mean?" he asked, his voice tight. "It means I initiated an automated clearinghouse wire transfer the second the chronological lock on my trust expired," I replied. "The funds were routed to a locked corporate holding account belonging to a limited liability company that I solely control. The money is gone. The original trust account contains $0. Your power of attorney is a useless piece of paper granting you control over an empty vault." Tiffany snatched the first page from her mother's hands. She read the bold numbers, her eyes widening as the reality of her shattered condominium dreams and her husband's unfunded venture set in. "But you cannot do that," she stammered. "Mom had the lawyers draft the injunction. She drafted a trap for a system she did not understand," I countered. "Turn to the second page." Brenda's hands were trembling now, a fine, rapid vibration that made the paper flutter. She looked at the second sheet. It was a spreadsheet consisting of timestamps, numeric addresses, and device identifiers. Those are local network traffic logs. I continued laying out the forensic evidence with precision. For the past 2 weeks, I monitored every data packet transmitting through the router in Henderson. That document highlights multiple unauthorized login attempts on the Vanguard Heritage portal. The access requests originated from the media access control address matching your rose gold tablet. You attempted to breach a secure financial institution. You searched for legal loopholes regarding conservatorships, and you documented your intent in plain text emails to Tiffany. Uncle David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He loosened his silk tie, his eyes darting toward the heavy velvet curtains as if calculating the shortest route to the exit. Aunt Susan picked up her wineglass but set it down without drinking. The enablers were suddenly realizing they were sitting at a table where federal offenses were being discussed. "Now look at the third page," I commanded. Brenda did not want to look. She kept her eyes fixed on the empty space between our plates. Tiffany grabbed the third sheet. It featured a magnified image of my signature alongside a grid of pixelation analysis and file metadata. Growing up, my mother treated important household paperwork with profound negligence. She shoved school permission slips, medical records, and tax forms into a chaotic junk drawer in the hallway, complaining about the burden of maintaining our lives. She never realized that a neglected archive is a goldmine for an identity thief. "That is a metadata report," I stated, my voice carrying to every corner of the silent dining room. "Yesterday, I breached your shared cloud drive. I found the final draft of the durable power of attorney drawn up by Caldwell. I found my own signature resting on the 14th page. You went into the hallway filing cabinet, pulled my old high school financial aid application, and photographed my signature. You cropped it and digitally pasted it onto a legal document intended to strip me of my assets." Tiffany dropped the paper onto the tablecloth as if it had burned her fingers. Brad sat back in his chair, the unearned confidence entirely erased from his posture. He looked at Brenda with a mixture of shock and dawning panic. I leaned forward slightly, resting my forearms on the table. Title 18, United States Code Section 1343, covers wire fraud. I recited the statutes the same way I would read a firewall compliance manual. Title 18, United States Code Section 1028, covers identity theft. You forged a digital signature on a legally binding document with the explicit intent to misappropriate nearly $3 million. You transmitted those fraudulent documents across state lines via cloud servers. Brenda finally looked at me. The artificial maternal warmth was gone. Her eyes were wide and panicked, reflecting the chilling reality of a trapped animal. "Victoria, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "You sat at this table and raised a glass to my future while holding a forged document designed to steal it," I said. "You assumed I would be too intimidated by the crystal glasses and the expensive steak to fight back. You gambled that my silence meant I was blind." I gestured toward the white envelope. "The original files, the encrypted offline drives, and the authenticated network logs are currently sitting in a fireproof safe in downtown Las Vegas. They are in the physical custody of Gideon Shaw, my late father's estate attorney." David cleared his throat, a dry scraping sound. "Gideon Shaw," he repeated, recognizing the name of a man known for his ruthless legal integrity. "Yes," I confirmed. "Gideon holds the unalterable proof of your forgery. He also holds a drafted complaint prepared for the Nevada Attorney General." The threat hung in the air, cold and undeniable. I was not making an emotional appeal. I was establishing a perimeter. I was setting the terms of my surrender and their defeat. "If you ever attempt to contact me again," I outlined my conditions with slow, deliberate pacing. "If you ever attempt to challenge the asset transfer, if you ever ask me to fix a computer co-sign a loan or attend a family dinner, Gideon Shaw has standing instructions to forward the entire forensic dossier to the federal authorities. You will not face a civil dispute over a trust fund. You will face a federal indictment for wire fraud and felony forgery." Tiffany let out a ragged sob, pressing her hands over her face. Her lifestyle illusion was collapsing in real time. The credit card debt was no longer a temporary inconvenience waiting for a bailout. It was a permanent, crushing reality. Brad stared at his half-empty espresso cup, the realization washing over him that his software company would never exist. Aunt Susan looked at my mother with quiet horror. "Brenda, you forged her signature." Susan asked, her voice trembling. You actually did that? Brenda did not answer. She stared at the 3 pieces of printer paper resting on the white linen. The manila envelope containing her grand scheme sat useless beside them. The casino floor hummed beyond the velvet curtains filled with people hoping for a fortunate turn of events. The house always wins, Mom, I said, picking up my glass of sparkling water. But this is not your house anymore. I placed a $100 bill on the table to cover my beverage. The seared Wagyu beef sat cold on their plates. The vintage champagne had lost its carbonation. The opulent room designed to facilitate my submission had become the exact venue of my liberation. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I stood at the edge of the table looking down at the wreckage I had orchestrated. The private dining enclosure designed to be the theater of my financial execution had transformed into a sterile containment zone. The heavy velvet curtains trapped the suffocating panic radiating from my family. Nobody moved to stop me. Nobody offered a rebuttal. The 3 pieces of printer paper resting on the white linen exerted a gravitational pull that pinned them to their chairs. Brad was the first to vocalize the collapse. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Brenda. His posture, the relaxed sprawl of an aspiring tech mogul, vanished. He sat forward, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned a mottled white. You told us the capital was guaranteed. Brad said, his voice tight and thin. You said the injunction was a formality. I have payroll due on Friday, Brenda. I signed vendor contracts based on your assurance that the $150,000 was clearing this week. My lead developer is going to walk and the entire platform will default. Brenda opened her mouth to placate him, but Tiffany shattered the remaining quiet. The flawless influencer facade she curated for the internet crumbled into raw, unfiltered terror. The condo. Tiffany gasped, her breathing shallow and erratic. Mom, the earnest money deposit. I submitted the wire transfer on Tuesday. I took a cash advance on my platinum card because you promised we would reimburse it with Victoria's money by the weekend. If we fail to close by the end of the month, I forfeit the entire deposit. Tiffany pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. The designer silk blouse she wore suddenly looked like a costume she could no longer afford. The $85,000 of hidden credit card debt she had carried like a minor inconvenience was no longer a secret. It was a terminal diagnosis for her lifestyle. She began to cry, shedding her polished persona, as the reality of her financial ruin set in. She was a 26-year-old woman, drowning in liabilities, and the life raft she planned to steal had just sailed away. She had already posted photos of the floor plan to her social media accounts, bragging to her followers about her new luxury skyline view. The social humiliation of backing out of the contract was crashing down on her alongside the financial devastation. She was hyperventilating, the sound sharp and ragged in the quiet room. Brenda watched her preferred daughter fall apart. The maternal instinct to soothe Tiffany collided with the chilling realization that her own freedom was hanging by a thread. Brenda shifted her gaze back to me, attempting to salvage whatever leverage she thought she retained. The cold smirk was gone, replaced by a fragile, trembling mask of maternal concern. Her carefully applied makeup seemed to settle into the fine lines around her mouth, making her look a decade older in a matter of seconds. Victoria, please sit down, Brenda implored, softening her tone to mimic genuine affection. You are taking this entirely out of context. You do not understand the legal nuances of estate management. I was never trying to steal from you. I was trying to protect the family. The world is predatory. I just wanted to ensure the legacy your father built remained secure until you were ready. She reached a hand across the table, palm open, offering an olive branch woven from perjury. She glanced toward Uncle David and Aunt Susan, desperate for her enablers to validate the narrative. David, tell her, Brenda pleaded. Tell her how complicated these financial transitions can be. Uncle David did not offer his customary validation. He was a man who prized his pristine social standing in Summerlin above all else. He navigated his entire existence to avoid discomfort and scandal. The revelation that his sister had forged a signature on a legal document to bypass a chronological trust lock was not a simple family dispute. It was a severe legal liability. The word forgery carries a specific weight in affluent corporate circles, and David wanted zero proximity to the blast radius. David slowly pulled his linen napkin from his lap and placed it on the table. He pushed his chair back, creating a deliberate physical distance between himself and Brenda. "I think we need to excuse ourselves," David stated, his voice stripped of its earlier patronizing warmth. "Susan and I were under the impression this was a simple birthday dinner. We want no part in whatever unauthorized legal maneuvering you have engaged in, Brenda." Susan stood up in silent agreement, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the clasp of her handbag. She refused to look at her sister-in-law. The enablers were retreating. The social currency Brenda had spent decades accumulating, the carefully maintained image of the perfect suburban matriarch, was bankrupt. They recognized that the woman sitting at the head of the table was holding a fraudulent instrument. They knew the Nevada Attorney General did not care about family loyalty when prosecuting wire fraud. Brenda watched her brother walk toward the velvet curtains, abandoning her to the consequences of her actions. The isolation was immediate and profound. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like an unpaid utility. "You did not want to protect me, Mom," I said. The acoustics of the room captured the flat, steady rhythm of my words. "You wanted a payout. You viewed my father's death as a delayed lottery ticket, and you viewed my quiet nature as a weakness you could exploit. You brought me to a casino expecting to cash in your chips." I paused, letting the finality of the moment settle over the remnants of the meal. The prime ribeye steak sat congealing in truffle butter. The vintage champagne had lost its effervescence, sitting flat and warm in the crystal flutes. The decadent spread they had ordered on credit was now a monument to their hubris. "But the house always wins, Mom," I delivered the final unalterable truth. "And this is not your house." Tiffany released another ragged sob, burying her face in her arms. Brad stared at the wall, calculating the exact trajectory of his impending bankruptcy. Brenda sat frozen at the head of the table, her hands hovering above the forged documents she could never submit. "In my profession, we utilize a specific protocol when isolating malicious software. Once the threat is identified, trapped inside a sandbox, and fully mapped, we execute a purge command. We do not feel anger toward the virus. We do not celebrate its deletion. We simply observe the system cleansing itself, verifying that the corrupted files are permanently quarantined." Standing in that private dining room, I felt the exact same clinical detachment. I did not feel the urge to scream. I did not experience a rush of vindictive joy. I simply watched the destructive elements of my family realize they had been permanently isolated from my network. The threat was neutralized. The corrupted dynamics that had governed my childhood were purged. The performance was over. The theater had closed. I adjusted the strap of my leather tote bag, ensuring it rested securely on my shoulder. I did not wait for Brenda to formulate another lie. I did not wait for Tiffany to beg for a loan I would never grant. The boundaries were set, and the firewall was impenetrable. I turned my back on the table and walked toward the heavy velvet curtains, leaving the debris of their entitlements scattered across the white linen. The faint sounds of the casino floor grew louder as I approached the exit, a chaotic symphony of people hoping for a lucky break. I did not need luck. I had built my own certainty. I reached into the side pocket of my leather tote bag and retrieved a crisp $100 bill. I placed it gently onto the white linen tablecloth, right next to the empty crystal glass that had held my sparkling water. "That should cover my beverage," I said, keeping my voice level and unhurried. "The rest of the dinner bill is your responsibility." I turned away from the table. I did not look back to gauge their reactions. I did not wait to watch the waiter hand Brenda an invoice that likely exceeded $2,000 for premium Wagyu steaks and vintage champagne she could not afford. The velvet curtains parted easily under my hand, and I stepped out of the private dining enclosure. The transition from the suffocating tension of that room to the loud, chaotic energy of the main restaurant felt like breaching the surface of the water after holding my breath for 21 years. The host offered a polite nod as I walked past his podium. I navigated the sprawling casino floor, listening to the mechanical chimes of the slot machines and the cheers radiating from the craps tables. The patrons surrounding me were chasing a statistical anomaly, throwing their wages into a system mathematically engineered to drain them. My mother had played the exact same game. She just used my birth certificate instead of casino chips. I retrieved my overnight duffel bag from the bell desk, handing the attendant the claim ticket and a generous tip. The automatic glass doors slid open, yielding to the dry desert heat of the Las Vegas night. The neon lights of the strip illuminated the sky in vibrant shades of magenta and gold. I requested a transportation service and stood on the curb waiting. I was 21 years old, holding a single bag possessing an impenetrable corporate vault and breathing the cleanest air I had ever tasted. The passage of time is the ultimate auditor. It examines the ledgers of our choices and balances the accounts without mercy. 6 months have elapsed since that dinner at the steakhouse. I did not monitor the immediate fallout directly. I did not need to. The natural consequences of their fiscal irresponsibility executed themselves with predictable precision. Tiffany and Brad were forced to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy less than 90 days after the dinner. The earnest money deposit on the luxury Skyline condominium was forfeited exactly as Tiffany had feared. The loss of those funds triggered a chain reaction, causing a default on their mounting credit card balances. The pristine white Range Rover was repossessed in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, towed away, while Tiffany watched from her living room window. Her lifestyle creator persona fractured under the weight of public insolvency. She stopped posting curated photos of iced lattes and luxury goods. The digital grid she had weaponized to project superiority went entirely dark. Brad abandoned his software venture, taking a salaried position as a junior sales representative, just to satisfy the bankruptcy court requirements. Their marriage buckled under the strain of actual accountability, devoid of the financial cushion they had planned to steal from me. Brenda faced a different type of reckoning. She did not face federal indictment. I instructed Gideon Shaw to retain the offline flash drive and the authenticated network logs in his fireproof safe. We never filed the complaint with the Nevada Attorney General. We did not need to. The mere existence of that forensic dossier serves as a permanent, unyielding deterrent. Brenda knows that if she ever attempts to contact me, if she ever tries to retaliate or demand financial assistance, Gideon possesses the standing authorization to forward the forgery evidence to the authorities. She lives inside a psychological prison of her own design. She was forced to sell the house in Henderson, unable to afford the property taxes and the basic maintenance without my free labor and the anticipated influx of my inheritance. She downsized to a cramped apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. She works as a receptionist at a local dental clinic, now answering phones and scheduling cleanings to cover her basic living expenses. She wakes up every morning knowing that her freedom relies entirely on my mercy. She gambled her relationship with her daughter for a payout and lost both. The silence she used to weaponize against me is now the very thing that surrounds her in that small apartment. My own landscape looks profoundly different. I relocated to a high-security apartment building closer to my firm. The property features biometric access protocols, secure parking, and 24-hour concierge service. My environment is safe-structured and entirely under my jurisdiction. I received a promotion at Zenith Cyber Defense, transitioning from a standard analyst to a senior incident response lead. I manage a team of dedicated professionals who rely on data logic and mutual respect. We trace threat actors, patch vulnerabilities, and build architectures designed to withstand targeted assaults. I do not fix broken laptops for ungrateful relatives anymore. I protect the digital assets of multinational corporations, and I am compensated appropriately for my expertise. The capital inside the ironclad Arch corporate accounts remains secure, growing steadily through conservative, diversified investments. I hired a fiduciary to manage the portfolio, a professional who answers only to me and operates with total transparency. Gideon Shaw remains my legal counsel. He has become more than just an attorney. He is a mentor, a trusted advisor who checks in on me not because he requires free technical support, but because he genuinely values my intellect and my character. My incident response team at Zenith has become my community. We spend our weekends hiking the Red Rock Canyon and sharing meals where everyone splits the bill evenly. They are my chosen family, built on a foundation of verified trust and mutual support, rather than geographical accident and obligation. People often romanticize the concept of family. Society conditions us to believe that shared genetics mandate endless forgiveness and unconditional loyalty. We are taught to absorb the damage inflicted by the people who share our last name because the cultural narrative demands unity at all costs. My profession taught me a different philosophy. In the realm of information security, we operate under a framework called zero trust. The core principle of zero trust is simple. Never trust, always verify. You do not grant access to a system simply because a user is located inside the building. You verify their credentials, you monitor their behavior, and you restrict their permissions to the exact level required to function. I applied the zero trust architecture to my own life. I realized that setting boundaries is not an act of revenge. It is the implementation of a necessary firewall. A firewall does not harbor anger toward the malicious code it blocks. It simply identifies the threat and denies access, protecting the core operating system from corruption. I spent the first 2 decades of my life acting as a human shield for a family that viewed my existence as a utility. I was the silent observer, absorbing their micro-cruelties and managing their self-inflicted crises. I thought enduring their toxicity was the price of admission to a family unit. I know better now. True security does not come from shrinking yourself to appease threat actors. It comes from recognizing your own inherent value and building an infrastructure that safeguards your peace. My name is Victoria Aaron. I am an information security analyst. I identified a critical vulnerability in my life, and I deployed a permanent patch. I locked the vault, threw away their forged key, and walked out of the casino a winner. The house always wins, but only when you build the house yourself.
We grow up believing in a specific version of the American dream, one where the family home is a sanctuary, a quiet fortress against a chaotic world. We imagine dinner tables filled with shared stories, parents providing a steady foundation, and children stepping out into the world armed with the unconditional support of the people who raised them. But as Victoria's story reveals, the walls of a home can just as easily conceal a sophisticated trap. Her journey from the unnoticed, utilized daughter to the silent architect of her own liberation is not merely a tale of high-stakes financial maneuvering. It is a profound, cautionary mirror held up to the very core of modern parenting, challenging us to examine the values we instill, the fairness we practice, and the true meaning of family responsibility. When we look closely at the dynamics that forced a 21-year-old information security analyst to build a corporate firewall against her own mother, we find a roadmap of parental failures. The first and most devastating of these is the creation of a hierarchy of love. In Victoria's home, affection was not a given. It was an exclusive currency awarded only to Tiffany, the golden child. Brenda built a shrine to Tiffany's superficial charm while treating Victoria as an invisible utility, a scapegoat expected to fix laptops, wire security cameras, and shrink into the background. For parents, the message here is sharp and unforgiving. Love cannot be conditional upon performance or aesthetic appeal. Every child possesses a unique architecture of strengths. When parents compare when they elevate one child by standing on the shoulders of another, they do not just crush a young person's self-worth. They sever the sibling bond forever, replacing camaraderie with quiet, enduring resentment. Fairness is not a parenting strategy. It is the fundamental baseline of a safe home. This leads us to a second equally critical failure, the inability to value substance over spectacle. American culture often glorifies the loud, the flashy, and the immediate. Brenda worshipped at this altar, funding Tiffany's illusion of a luxury influencer lifestyle while drowning in debt. Meanwhile, she dismissed Victoria's grueling, complex career in cybersecurity as simply playing on computers. As parents guiding children through an increasingly superficial digital age, it is our primary responsibility to anchor them in reality. We must celebrate hard work, logical reasoning, and genuine financial independence. A parent's role is to recognize the quiet, formidable passions of their children and nurture them rather than chasing the hollow validation of social media aesthetics. A Range Rover bought on credit will eventually be repossessed, but a resilient, analytical mind will survive the storm. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Victoria's narrative is the commodification of a child's future. Brenda did not view Victoria's upcoming 21st birthday as a milestone of adulthood. She viewed it as a slot machine hitting the jackpot. The $2.8 million trust fund, left by a father who understood the necessity of protection, was treated as an emergency fund to erase Brenda and Tiffany's financial recklessness. Here lies a profound truth about traditional family responsibility. Children are not a retirement plan, nor are they a casino payout waiting to be claimed. A healthy family structure operates as a launch pad propelling the next generation forward. It does not act as a parasite draining the resources of the young to subsidize the mistakes of the old. Respecting a child's financial boundaries, especially as they cross the legal thresholds of adulthood, is the ultimate demonstration of parental respect. A true parent works tirelessly to leave an inheritance, whether financial or moral, rather than plotting to steal one. To justify this kind of exploitation, toxic households often twist the concept of family loyalty into a weapon. Brenda invoked the phrase, "family comes first," not as a shield to protect her daughters, but as an emotional ransom note. She expected Victoria to blindly sign over her autonomy and take on predatory loans under the guise of familial duty. But true loyalty in any culture, and particularly within the framework of a traditional family, must be reciprocal. It requires mutual respect and earned trust. When loyalty is used to camouflage manipulation, a child has every right to implement a zero-trust policy. We must teach our children that obligation does not equal love, and that they are never required to set themselves on fire simply to keep their family warm. Ultimately, Victoria's story is a triumph of boundaries. She did not engage in screaming matches in the living room. She did not plead for a mother's love that was never going to come. Instead, she used her logic, her professional expertise, and the law to establish a definitive, unbreachable perimeter around her life. For parents, this is the most counterintuitive yet vital lesson of all. Teaching your child to say no is a hallmark of successful parenting. We often condition children to be compliant to keep the peace and to endure discomfort for the sake of harmony. But a child who knows how to identify toxicity, who knows how to calmly and firmly lock a door against manipulation, is a child who is truly prepared for the world. Equipping a young person with the emotional awareness and the strength to enforce their own boundaries is the greatest armor a parent can provide. A home is meant to be a safe harbor, a place where a child's future is nurtured, protected, and celebrated. It is never supposed to be a betting floor where their potential is wagered away by the very people tasked with guarding it. Victoria survived because she learned to become the architect of her own safety, building a life that did not require the approval of those who failed her. Stories like these remind us of the quiet battles fought behind closed doors and the immense courage it takes to finally walk away. If you have ever had to build a firewall to protect your own peace, or if you simply believe in the power of defining your own worth, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to Great Vengeance, where we continue to explore the intricate, often hidden dynamics of family boundaries and the strength it takes to reclaim your narrative. As you reflect on Victoria's journey, take a moment to look at the structures in your own life. Think about the expectations you place on those you love and the expectations they place on you. A dining table can be a place of gathering, or it can be a place where the terms of your surrender are drafted. You have the pen, you have the blueprint. When you sit down at your own table tonight, look closely at the faces around you. Are you sitting in a sanctuary, or are you just waiting for the dealer to show their hand?